Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. A very good morning, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. Wherever you're joining us from this morning, we hope you're keeping safe and well. So last week, we were joined by Professor Conor Murphy from Maynooth University, who spoke to us about climate change and its effects on our weather patterns and the need to adapt to climate change across the world. And today, we are going to be joined by Frances Rochford, who's the manager of the EPA Climate Change program, who's going to be speaking to us today about the opportunities that climate change presents and also some of the recent data that has been produced by the EPA in relation to climate change. Frances, you're very, very welcome to this morning's webinar.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's lovely to be here.
And we're also joined by another Mark this morning, Mark Plunkett, who is a Signpost Specialist with Teagasc. So we're going to be taking a closer look today at the opportunities that are presented by climate change, but also some of the data that's been produced by the EPA. Mary Frances, a very broad programme, an important programme that you're managing there within the EPA. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing there?
Yes, so we have a broad remit when it comes to climate change here in the EPA. Many people will be familiar with the work that the EPA does in relation to the production of our greenhouse gas inventories and projections. But we have a wider remit than that, and I'll be speaking to some of that this morning. We have a behavioural insights programme looking at how people are responding and acting in relation to climate change, a broad climate science and research programme, and we engage at an international level as well when it comes to climate change, as well as administering the EU emissions trading system here in Ireland.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibilities, and particularly interesting the behavioural piece as well. And I know you're going to be discussing that later on as well. Mary Frances, we'll hand straight over to you and look forward to speaking to you after the presentation.
Thanks very much, Mark. So just to start off, I'd like to thank you for inviting me along this morning. And over the next 35 minutes or so, I'm going to highlight what the data is telling us, what the research is telling us, and what the people are telling us when it comes to the opportunities and the need for climate action. I'm going to talk you through the findings of two important reports that the EPA published this year, Ireland's Climate Change Assessment and Climate Change in the Irish Mind. Before I jump into them, just a reminder about the EPA and our role. So we are an independent public body. Our powers and responsibilities are set out in national legislation, and we have a wide range of functions that are broadly covered under the themes of regulation, knowledge, and working with others. We are an environmental regulator, so we regulate industry. We monitor the quality of Ireland's environment and are a key source of trusted scientific data and evidence. And I mentioned the Ireland's greenhouse gas inventories and projections as an example of some of that data that we provide. And we're also committed to collaborating and partnering with others. So we know we can't do this job on our own. It's important that we work with others and that we collaborate to deliver a sustainable and healthy environment that's valued and protected by all. So in my chat there with Mark, I introduced some of the climate change activities that we carry out here in the EPA, and just on the screen there you'll see some of our reports. And as I said, today I'm going to be touching on our emissions data in terms of our greenhouse gas inventories and projections, and also I'll be focusing on Ireland's Climate Change Assessment report, which was produced in our climate science and research space, working with others, and also in our climate services, the EPA works to support the National Dialogue on Climate Action, and our Climate Behaviour and Insights work stream produces the Climate Change in the Irish Mind report. And you'll also see there that we carry out work in the space of climate science and policy analysis, and as I said earlier, the emissions trading scheme. So, last week, Conor spoke to you about Conor Murphy spoke to you about about Ireland's first climate change assessment report. And I guess where I'd like to start today is just to take a step back a little piece in terms of the context of the discussions that we have around climate change and the drivers of climate change. And this largely in Ireland starts with our greenhouse gas emissions inventories and projections. So the data, what do we know about our emissions from the activities that we carry out on a national level? And we have a national climate objective which says that the state will pursue and achieve by no later than 2050 a transition to climate resilient, biodiversity rich, environmentally sustainable and climate neutral economy. And the 2021 Climate Act provides for a reduction of 51% in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 2018 levels. So where are we in terms of that ambition? The most recent EPA greenhouse gas inventory and projections data really highlight the challenges that we have in Ireland to face in terms of achieving the scale and the pace of greenhouse gas emissions reductions that are required to meet this national and in our EU obligations. We will be publishing our 2023 greenhouse gas provisional inventory in the coming weeks. And this graph that I have here on the screen is from our 2022 inventory. And that shows that agriculture, transport and energy are key sources of emissions in Ireland. And in 2022, we had a decrease in our emissions of almost 2%, 1.9%, which was driven by higher fuel prices, increased renewable energy, behavioural change and regulation. On the other side of the screen, you'll see our recent greenhouse gas projections that we published in May of this year. And what this data is telling us is that Ireland can achieve a reduction of up to 29% in total greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, compared to that target of 51%, when the impact of the majority of the actions that are set out in the 2024 Climate Action Plan are included. Now, what this means is that Ireland would need to fully implement a wide range of policies and plans across a wide sector for these to be able to deliver the anticipated carbon savings. So we need to implement them, and then we need for these measures to deliver the anticipated savings that we think they can achieve. And what I have on the screen is known as the with additional measures. So this is all of those plans that are set out. It's what we're currently doing, and it's that added ambition in terms of the step up that we need to take as we try to achieve that national objective. What this data also tells us is that across all sectors of our economy, we see that they're on a pathway to exceed their national sectoral emissions ceilings for 2025 and out to 2030. This data also tells us that the first two carbon budgets will not be met, and by a significant margin. And in a European context, it also highlights the challenge that we face there in terms of meeting our emissions targets, indicating that Ireland will not meet its effort sharing regulation target of 42% by 2030. So for us to reach both our national and our EU targets, we requires implementing policies that deliver emissions reductions across all sectors in the short term. So there's lots of action that we know that we can take, we need to take, and we need to do that at scale and pace. So I've mentioned, and Mark in the introduction referred to Conor Murphy, Professor Conor Murphy's really excellent presentation last week, where he introduced among his discussion on climate change adaptation, Ireland's first climate change assessment report. And this report was published in January by the EPA. It's a major scientific assessment. It was undertaken by 22 leading academics here in Ireland with 9 lead authors. And what this report does is that it serves to complement and to localise the global assessments that are undertaken by the International Panel on Climate Change. And its findings build on these assessments, and then it adds that important local and national context. And as you see here on the screen, it was set out in 4 volumes. The climate science piece, looking at Ireland in a changing world. It spoke to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. Going back to that national objective that I introduced at the start. It spoke about being prepared for Ireland's climate future, and that's what Connor's focused on last week. And then also realising the benefits of transition and transformation. And we then produced a synthesis report that ties all of this information together. And this information is available on the EPA website. So as Connor spoke largely to volumes 1 and 3, last week, I'll touch on those in my presentation, but generally I'll focus on the other areas. And I'll also consider the report kind of in its totality, the findings as set out in the synthesis report. So in terms of and I think Connor may have shared this some of these images last week. So as he set out very, very clearly, we are living in and experiencing climate change in Ireland. And as Connor highlighted in terms of the climate signals that indicate this last year, we see them in a number of areas in terms of the data. So we see that human activity has resulted in widespread and rapid changes in our climate, which are impacting us here in Ireland today as well as in a global context. We see that globally, 2023 was the hottest year on record, and indeed in 2024, there's been a number, every month we hear of record-breaking weather indicators and climate indicators. So that global trend is being experienced here in Ireland. Annual average temperatures are now approximately 1 degree higher than they were in the early part of the 20th century. And we're also experiencing more heavy rainfall events and weather extremes, which are likely linked to human-induced climate change, as well as evidence in studies that highlight higher rates of sea level rise in parts of Ireland that are higher than the global average since the late 20th century. So what does that's the kind of the up to now and the here and now. As we look into the future, we see that these changes are expected to continue in terms of their intensity over the coming decades. Extreme weather events in Ireland highlight the vulnerability of our people, our environment, infrastructure, and economy to these climate change impacts. And for us to halt warming globally and in Ireland, this requires rapidly reducing our emissions to at least net zero carbon dioxide emissions and substantially cutting other greenhouse gas emissions. And a key message, like one of the key messages from Ireland's climate change assessment report, really is that every action matters. And because with every additional increment of warming, the impacts for Ireland will increase. But it also highlights that we have an opportunity here. There is hope here in terms of what we can do to protect our future and to address the impacts of climate change. And the report calls out that early and rapid global action on emission reductions would likely leave an Irish climate at the end of the century that's still broadly recognisable in comparison to today. So there is an emphasis here on us taking early action and acting now, whereas delayed action would be very likely to leave an Irish climate that is increasingly unrecognisable as the century progresses. And Connor last week spoke of the various comparisons between the beginning of our industrial age and now. And as this data is indicating that as we look into the future, there is an opportunity for us to still have a climate that's recognisable to what we're experiencing today. It's important because future changes in climate will impact all aspects of Irish society, the environment, and the economy. So there are opportunities here for us to take action and to deliver a climate, both to reduce our emissions out to 2030, and then beyond that, looking at delivering a climate neutral Ireland by 2050. So I spoke at the beginning in relation to Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions in the context of 2030. And the ICA, the Climate Change Assessment Report, considered this and also the longer term goal of a climate neutral Ireland by 2050. And it highlights here that Ireland has made limited progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions to date, and we have a long way to go. Our emissions peaked in 2021 and have reduced in the, as highlighted in the assessment report, up to that point by 15% since then. So we have made some progress. We have made progress in the past 20 years, and we've done better in some sectors than others. And we particularly see where we have made progress in aspects of our electricity generation and our heating, for example. And in others, including in agriculture and transport, we have further to go. Ireland is currently ranked second highest across the EU when all greenhouse gas emissions are considered on a per person basis. So we, as a country, that's where we fit in terms of our peers across Europe. The report echoes the message that Ireland needs to pick up the pace of action when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to our changed and future climate, and highlights that the currently deployed policies and actions are not sufficient, and Ireland is not on track to meet our reduction targets. So more action is needed, including large scale and immediate emissions target reductions across all sectors. And this examples of where we will see this in quite a transformational way is within our energy system. And this can only be achieved with appropriate supports, regulation and investment for growth in our offshore wind and our other renewable technologies. And the assessment identified that the pathway was clearer for energy and transport in the built environment than it is for agriculture and land use. But there are challenges for all sectors to overcome when it comes to achieving that climate neutral future. The assessment highlighted that we have a heavy dependency on fossil fuels, and despite the progress that I've mentioned in delivering renewable energy including delivering renewable energy in our electricity sector, there are many more opportunities, particularly when we look at the opportunities for decarbonisation of our heat and transport sector. We see that significant reductions are needed in agriculture, and we see the innovations already coming through, particularly in areas such as feed additives and new fertilisers. And our land needs to move from being a net source of emissions to a sink through a combination of afforestation and rewetting. The transition to a climate neutral society is an urgent challenge and an opportunity for all of us to build a resilient future for all. But the longer we delay in taking action, the longer it will be before we can realise the benefits and the opportunities for society and our economy, and for our people, communities and businesses that can be achieved through this innovation and decarbonisation. So last week, Conor spoke to, gone too far ahead there. Conor spoke to adapting to climate change. So I won't focus too much on that, but I do want to highlight that the mitigation and adaptation actions are inherently linked. So the more warming we experience, the greater need we will have for adaptation, and the greater the challenge of adaptation will be. And the assessment found that Ireland needs to adapt to ongoing and future climate impacts, and doing better will require working more closely with people, taking account of the benefits that can be delivered by nature, monitoring and evaluating outcomes, and increasing public and private sector involvement. part of the work that the EPA is doing in terms of supporting the development of that climate resilient Ireland is the development of Ireland's first climate change risk assessment. And that is due for publication in early next year. And the main output of this will be a national climate change risk register that will identify the urgency ratings and the priority risks and opportunities for climate change in Ireland, and the actions that we can take across all sectors. This will be a major resource. It will provide a basis for making decisions on the acceptability of climate risks to Irish society. It will be used by policymakers and stakeholders, such as many of you on the call today, in relation to national and sectoral adaptation planning and the actions to mitigate unacceptable risks and to realise opportunities. So we know in terms of, as we look forward, there's an opportunity to drive this transformation, and the climate change assessment report highlights that effective and just transformation will have mitigation and adaptation benefits, as I've highlighted there. And these also bring broader benefits for health, well-being, nature, sustainable economic development, and highlights that the state has a key role to play in supporting action across all society. And one of the strong messages for me, both working in this area, but also on a personal level, was the message that decisions taken this decade will reverberate for generations to come. When we examine, just to highlight some of the opportunities that are there in terms of that societal and economic development and our energy and food systems, it really highlights the fact that there are some actions that we can take that really they have multiple benefits, both in terms of the type of benefit that they can deliver for us in terms of our financial well-being, our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and in terms of how we live and work. In terms of the energy transition, we can see that there are many benefits in terms of decarbonising and lowering our fossil fuel dependency, and that includes lowering our fossil fuel import dependency, increasing our energy security, and reducing combustion in vehicles and buildings, increases air quality. Renewables open up opportunities for the green economy, and that gives opportunities for both our coastal communities and our farmers. And distributed energy enables homeowners to produce energy and thereby lowering our energy bills. We see as well when it comes to our urban settlements. So there's opportunities in terms of how we implement a more integrated planning system that can connect our communities, can make our urban centres, both our towns, our villages, our cities, more pleasant places to live and to work, in terms of how we can access services more readily, in terms of the buildings themselves being more comfortable in which to live, and then also in terms of where we can have improved air quality in both within our buildings and also as we move around. And having more energy efficient buildings also helps us when it comes to our financial well-being. In terms of our food, land and nature, this area really highlights, is multifaceted. It highlights the opportunities for the benefits of supporting and addressing our biodiversity issues. It addresses in terms of our climate action, how we can, how nature-based solutions can have a win-win in terms of our adaptation, in terms of our climate action, but also in terms of biodiversity, our food security and our diversification in terms of our land use. In terms of our economic development, these actions provide us with an opportunity to consider alternative economic models. It allows us to look at and to develop alternative work profiles, opportunities for how people will work in different areas, such as the circular economy, the bioeconomy, in terms of how we have required new and the development of existing skill sets, but also in terms of the development of new opportunities for people both working in rural and urban settings into the future. And of course, in terms of the development and the opportunities for society, in terms of changes in terms of our mobility, for example, in terms of how we have structures such as our public transport system, our mobility in terms of more active travel, and then also in terms of the decisions we make about how we spend our time and where we spend our time into the future. So that is what the research is telling us in terms of Ireland's climate change assessment. And I just want to take a few minutes to look at what the people are telling us in terms of work that the EPA undertook in support of the National Dialogue on Climate Action. And this is the climate change in the Irish mind study. So this piece of work began in 2021. The EPA working with Yale University to carry out this first of its kind in Ireland, a nationally representative survey, which looks at the beliefs, the attitudes, the perceptions of climate change in Ireland among the Irish population. And the first wave, as I said, was carried out in 2021 and produced 3 main outputs. So we had the baseline report, which people responded to a national survey, and I'll talk you through some of the types of questions that we asked. And that gave us an indication of people's thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs. Then we moved on to a segmentation of that. So we identified Ireland's climate audiences, or Ireland's climate populations. And then we also produced a spatial representation of this data, which is available on the EPA website. So it's an interactive tool where you can go onto the website and see what other people in your area, in your county, are thinking about climate change, and to see how you compare among your peers. So to start at the end in a way, as I said, we were working with Yale University in relation to this project, and Yale has been working in this space for many years and developed an international methodology working off of what's known as the 6 Americas. And the 6 Americas, you'll see here on the bottom of the screen, is the disaggregation of the American public in relation to attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions in relation to climate change. And you'll see that there's 6 on the scale from the alarmed to the dismissive, and you'll see that there's quite a large proportion there in the disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive area. When we carried out, and that range is going from the highest belief in global warming, the most concerned and most motivated, back to that dismissive, where you see the lowest belief in global warming, they're least concerned, least motivated. And on the top of your screen there, you'll see the findings from that first wave that we carried out, and the disaggregation of the Irish public. And what we see there is that we have 4 Irelands rather than the 6 Americas, and we have we don't really have a population of climate denialism at all. We have large, alarmed, concerned populations, a cautious, and then quite a small doubtful 0.1 of a million, or 3% of the population. So we repeated this survey in August, the summer of last year. And so we have now wave 2 of this work was carried out. So we haven't undertaken that segmentation analysis as yet. We expect that we'll be publishing that in over the next month or so. But we have some interesting insights which we published earlier this year from our top line findings, so that survey that we carried out. And what we found was that when we looked at climate change beliefs and attitudes, that we see that there's good consistency between 2021 and 2023. Overall, we're seeing that the level of worry among the Irish public about climate change remains high. And we're seeing an overall change in patterns in terms of worries about local hazards. So we're seeing that there is a connection between people's concern about climate change and how it's impacting them on a local level. And we see that and where that ranks. So we're seeing that people are concerned. When we look at water pollution, it's 79%, but we're seeing now an increase between 21 and 23, that people are an increase in concern about severe storms, extreme heat. So we're seeing that now storms is moving up into that same realm as people's of concern as people have about water pollution. And we see that 95% of people think that climate change is happening. 88% say that climate change is affecting weather in Ireland. And you'll see that echoes the findings of the research. So people are tuned in to the same findings that came through in Ireland's climate change assessment. 93% trust scientists as a source of information about climate change. And just over half of people think that they're being harmed right now, or that climate change, in 21% see that climate change will occur in the next 10 years. When it comes to engagement on climate change, it is interesting that people show very high levels of personal engagement in climate change. We see that 89% saying that it's important to them personally. And in terms of how they engage and discuss, and the frequency of engagement and discussion around climate change, we see that 78% say that they often or occasionally discuss climate change with family and friends, and that 82% understand the scientific consensus on climate change, so that they understand that that scientists are in agreement that climate change is happening. We also see that there is an increase in engagement in terms of media engagement on climate change, and that people are hearing about climate change in the media. It's something that is becoming normalized in terms of the discussion, both in terms at a personal level, but also there where people are engaging and encountering discussions on climate change in the media. And we see a strong increase in engagement, saying that at least weekly in the media. It's gone up from 51% to 74% in 2023. And we also see that there's high levels of trust in media, in mainstream media, and in journalists, 68%, and say that they trust both mainstream media and journalists, and that there is a desire for the media to do more on climate change. We also looked at climate-related behaviours. So understanding behaviours has a strong influence on the perceptions of the ease or the difficulty when it comes to taking climate action. And it's important when it comes to communicating the norm, what's normal around climate change behaviours. And Irish people told us that 78% of people say that, as I said, they discuss climate change with family and friends, so it's normal for that type of discussion. And when it comes to people engaging with their consumer behaviours, over 52% said that they have bought goods or services in the last 12 months from a company that has taken action to reduce climate change, and that we see that 47% of Irish people intend to increase their consumer activism in the last year. So they're thinking, and that's important for all aspects of Ireland's economy in terms of how people are thinking and how they relate their consumer behaviours and the actions of companies from which they want to purchase a good or service. We also looked at climate literacy. So we looked at how people's understanding of climate change. So looking at both the factual and the applied knowledge. And what we saw there was that there was a high recognition of climate change as a topic. So people, recognized it like climate change. They'd heard of climate change. They'd heard of the greenhouse effect. And we see that 96% of Irish people have heard of the greenhouse effect as a climate change topic. That 66% correctly identified carbon dioxide, and 55% correctly identified methane as good at trapping heat in the atmosphere. So there's an understanding of how climate change is happening. But we also saw that there was just 5% of people that were able to distinguish that greenhouse effect from other environmental topics, such as acid rain or the ozone issues with the ozone layer. But 70% correctly identified that if they were to switch from a renewable energy source, that would have a large impact on reducing carbon footprint of an average person. We also saw that people underestimated the impact a plant-based diet would have on reducing carbon footprint. So we also then explored the support for government policy and on climate action. And we saw that there was a positive outlook on political, economic and quality of life topics, that the outlook does not differ by experience of economic difficulties, and that there is a strong desire for leadership on climate action from government. And here we saw, just to give an indication, we see that 87% say that Ireland has a responsibility to act on climate change and should do so, and should do what it can to reduce its own greenhouse gas emissions. So people feel that Ireland does have a responsibility, that it's not too small to act. We see that over 85% of Irish people say that business, local government, politicians, national government and citizens should do more to address climate change, and that climate change should be either a high or very high priority for government. And again, going back to the opportunities piece in the climate change assessment report, we see that people feel that taking climate action to reduce climate change will improve Ireland's quality of life. We see just there 74%, and that over half people think that taking action will reduce climate change to improve economic growth and create jobs. When it came to particular policies, so what we saw in 2023 was that support for policies that affect non-discretionary spending had weakened slightly. And we do see, and I should have emphasized this at the start, was that we don't generally see a large urban-rural divide when it comes to the findings of this work, both either in terms of the segmentation or in terms of responses to particular questions. What we do see here is that there is, although there is support, we see a overall support, a slight weakening of that support for certain policies in rural communities, in rural areas, such as banning of peat, coal and oil for home heating, higher taxes on cars that use petrol or diesel. We still see that there's high overall support, but just as a weakening, and we will be looking at this further. But there is an indication that for some policies where there is perhaps not a more readily available alternative, or an identified alternative, that there are some weakening of support among rural areas. So to conclude, in terms of climate change in the Irish mind, and to conclude my presentation for this morning, what we're seeing here is that there's near full agreement that climate change is happening, and 8 in 10 people are worried about it in Ireland. Climate change is important to Irish people personally, and they feel that it should be a very high priority for government. And Irish people remain positive to the benefits of climate action to the economy and quality of life, and strongly support a range of policies to address climate change. So that is it from me, and happy to take questions and hand back to Mark.
It's great, Mary. Thank you so much for really comprehensive findings there, from particular from that last study there with Yale University, and look, you have covered all the different aspects. I mean, it's interesting that use of behavioral science and understanding people's sentiment towards these different measures. I wonder, was there any findings in relation to how empowered people felt, that ability to actually change or shift the dial themselves? Was there anything coming through on that side of it?
Yeah, we generally see that people are expressing high levels of a desire to take action. And then when we look at ask questions in relation to what have you done in the last 12 months, what do you intend to do, we see that the percentage of a positive response there is somewhat less. It doesn't exactly mimic the desire. And we also see that people feel more strongly that others, so government should do something, politicians, so government or business or others should do something. But it's not necessarily that we think that people are kind of saying, no, that's it's fine, you do it, not me. What we're interested in understanding is, what are the barriers to action? So why might it be the case that somebody would like to do something but is not following through, or feels that they're not in a position to do something? And that can be for a number of reasons. And we are kind of delving in and looking at some particular, at various demographics. We see that often older people are concerned in relation to they're worried about climate change. They're worried about the impact that it's going to have on their families, but they may not have taken the step to retrofit their home and to as an example. And there may be reasons for that. There may be a cost issue. There may be that they're assessing that the return on investment in their lifetime, they may not realize that. It may be complicated and people don't know where to start, or it just may not be as easy. And we see that in younger demographics, maybe sometimes it might just be easier to take action. So there's opportunities there for us to create an environment where it's easier for people to take the right climate action.
Yes, yeah, that stage of life is important. All right. In the report, the ICCA report, it talks about the need for deep, rapid and sustained reductions in emissions, or cuts in emissions. I mean, based on the graph that you showed earlier on there, that doesn't appear to be happening, or where are we? That general trend seems to be good, but are we going to see an up in the ante in terms of the types of measures that people are going to be expected, or business or sectors of the economy are expected to undertake, given that relatively flat change that's occurring?
Well, what's positive is that we know the steps that we can take, that we know the actions. So there are many actions, like the Climate Action Plan 2024, which was recently finalised and published just there back at the end of May, as an example. Like it sets out the actions across all sectors. We are in May, and the climate change assessment report highlighted this as well, that there are a number of actions, a number of technologies that are ready, that are no regrets. You will get a benefit in terms of return on, both on societal, on an economic, be it a security of supply in the case of the energy sector. And the the challenge is the barrier to move from where we are. We know what we need to do to get into the point that we actually are in a position to take action. So it's not so much about us being asked to find something else to reduce that, to change that graph, but to act on what we know that needs to happen.
Okay. Mark, we have a number of questions coming through there, I see.
Yeah, there's quite a number of questions, Mark. Mary, plenty of questions here. I suppose one of the first ones there, Mary, is in respect to one of the graphs you presented. When was the greenhouse gas peak in Ireland? Was it 2021 or 2001? As shown.
2001.
2001. Okay, that's there's another question there. It's around the technologies, Mary. Where do farmers find products, technologies that can help reduce emissions?
So, in terms of the farming and agriculture sector, what we so the Teagasc MAC curve has set out, and I'm definitely, there's people on this call that can speak to that better than myself. That's highlighted both in terms of some actions that are there that are currently being implemented. So, the actions like multi-species sward, new types of fertilizer that are there, looking at breeding. And there are some that are ready, and there are some actions that are in the development phase. And what's important is that where we see that there are activities, new technologies that are in the early stage, that they're getting rolled out, and that they're where they're happening and where they're working well on farms, that there is that knowledge is shared, and that people can learn from the experiences of introducing those. And then in terms of the actions that are in a trial phase and that are being developed, that we move from the development to the implementation phase at scale. And also, as I said, you've got the Teagasc MAC, and then that's brought through into the climate action plan and the targets then that are set at a national level for all sectors, but also for agriculture.
Very good. And there's probably along similar lines, will the new climate risk register include mitigation technologies, and will they be costed based on cost per tonne of CO2 abated?
So this is the first iteration of this national climate risk register. So over time, we'll be able to incorporate additional information. It will touch on mitigation measures, but it will also look at the risks in and of themselves. And then when you take the mitigation measure into account, where does that leave the risk? And where it can incorporate cost, it will.
Mary, can I ask, where do you see the biggest wins over the next number of years between now and 2030? What would you say are the areas that we could see the biggest wins in?
And this, in some ways, it's a challenge because all sectors have to play their part and to take action. And we see that there are wins in relation to the energy sector. So where we know, I guess the wins are where we know the technology, where the technology is already there, and it's relatively well developed, and it can be, and people know how to use it as well. So we see that there's opportunities in the energy sector in particular, and we see from data that's come through so far this year in relation to emissions reduction in the energy sector, the move to renewables, and there's an opportunity there in terms of the sector itself, but also opportunities for landowners in terms of solar, in terms of wind energy, and at an individual level as well, in terms of how people can engage with the energy system to generate and use their own electricity or feed back into the grid. So it is really important for us to decarbonize our energy system, and we see that because in and of itself, because the move away from a dependence on fossil fuel, but also the dependence, the increased need. So as we move to electrify other parts of our economy and society, what we will want is that in electrifying, that we're using clean energy. So that will be in our transport sector, when we look at using electric vehicles, if it is and in terms of how we heat our homes. So we see that in terms of our residential emissions, there's wins there in terms of how both we insulate and how we build the fabric of our homes, but also in terms of how we heat our homes. So a move away from our solid fuel, and we're seeing that come through as well. So a move away from smoky fuels has a positive impact in terms of emissions reduction, and also a very positive impact in terms of our air quality, both in terms of our indoor air quality, but also our outdoor air quality, and how we live and function, and then the knock-on benefits for us in terms of our health and well-being. We see it in the agriculture sector as well, and again, you're all more expert than me in this area. But you know, there are measures that are there that have co-benefits in terms of climate action. And a move away from a move towards new fertilizers, away from using nitrogen-based fertilizers, and we see that through, for example, I mentioned multi-species forward earlier, that can have a benefit in terms of drought resistance as well. So you're looking at that adaptation space as well. We also see, you know, in that adaptation space, the importance of nature-based solutions. So where you're getting a win in terms of our emissions reductions, and also that it's protecting our land, it's protecting our property, and increasingly supporting biodiversity. So that's something that's really important, and we can achieve wins that are. It is really important for us in terms of focusing on reducing our emissions in the short term out to 2030. But it's also important that we're looking beyond 2030 and out. It's probably a sign as I'm getting older that 2050 actually doesn't feel as far away and isn't as far away as we might like it to be. So there are those actions that we can take today that will have a large impact into the future. And we see that in terms of afforestation, for example, and how can we move towards a system where there are benefits for both the climate, biodiversity, but also in terms of how we use our land.
Well, hopefully we'll all be around in 2050 to see the benefits. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, there's a few more questions coming through there.
Mary, there's a lot of questions here. I suppose a quick one, Mary, is when will the 2023 emission figures for agriculture be released?
In July.
Okay. Very, very good. Another one here, Mary. Do the EPA plan to put any compliance measures in place around farm GHG or ammonia emissions?
In terms of in that national space, so they're not quite sure in general, like as in general, or.
Well, I suppose if we don't meet our targets, Mary, like, you know what I mean, like we're coming up to the first budget in 2025, and then a big one in 2030. Like, I suppose will there be repercussions, or will there be more? Pressure put on the sector to meet targets, like.
So the EPA doesn't have an enforcement role in relation to the achievement of those national or sectoral targets. So we don't have a direct role in relation to that. Our role is in relation to the monitoring and the reporting of the national and sectoral emissions.
Okay, another one here, the transport sector, big challenges to reduce GHGs. What actions can they do, and will the sector meet their target?
So we see that transport and the other large sectors are all on a pathway where they're indicating that they wouldn't meet their sectoral ceiling currently, and that's based on our most recent projections. But the actions that for the transport sector they're set out in the climate action plan. They're the increase in electric vehicles. We see an increase in and in Ireland we are actually making good progress in relation to moving towards the use of electric vehicles. We see an increase in the use of biofuel within our fuel mix in our internal combustion engines. But really, it's in terms of transport, is that move, it's that avoid, move, shift is a model that the transport sector speak to. So where can we reduce the overall the need for as much travel as the need for as many car journeys and freight journeys as we currently undertake, and move to greater public transport. And we see the rollout of public transport and an improvement in both urban environments, but also in terms of greater levels of access to public transport in rural areas. We also see then in terms of the ability a better system in which we are able to cycle or walk as may needs be, and then a better infrastructure in terms of charging those electric vehicles, I should say as well. But also recognizing that there are challenges. So it's not a one size fits all. The challenges around transport that people will experience in an urban environment will be different to the types of challenges that people may experience in rural environments. And I should actually have said when I was speaking about the climate change assessment report, the authors there really particularly in volume 4, like they highlighted the importance of developing a shared vision and engagement with local communities and engagement with people across Ireland, so that this vision, be it a vision for transport, a vision for energy, a vision for agriculture, that there is engagement, and that the future climate sustainable state that we find ourselves, that in which we will build, that people have had their chance to have their say and input to developing that.
We're just coming up on time. I say we have time for one last question, Mark.
Okay, let me see. Why was the change in 2022 agricultural emissions to account for extra fuel used not backdated to 2018 based on base year? By adding the extra fuel for 2022, it reduced the agricultural emissions from 1.3 back to 0.3%. Any idea, Mary?
I don't, but I know someone who can answer that, so I can pick that up again, and happy if that person would like to reach out directly to us. I don't have that to hand for me, so I will.
Well, that's quite a technical one. So we can follow up with the person asking that question.
No problem.
So Mary, Frances, we're just up on time, so thank you so much for your time and putting together a really excellent presentation, actually, that can be used by many people around the country, I'm sure, for just that snapshot of where we're at in terms of climate action and the emission side of things as well. Mark, thanks very much for assisting with the questions. Some excellent questions coming through today. And incidentally, I was at the Beef Open Day that was organised by Teagasc in Grange this week, and I was really impressed with how engaged farmers were in the measures around reducing emissions. And I know Mark and his colleagues were there. Were really engaging stands and exhibits there, but it was just really the conversation was very much based around those sustainability measures, the species-rich grassland and changing fertilizers. So it's fantastic to see that response from the sector that's happening there. So thanks to our other Mary in the background, Mary Loughlin, for looking after the the technical side of things. Next week, we're going to be joined by the director of Teagasc, Professor Frank O'Mara, who is going to be discussing that realizing that ambition of a sustainable future for agriculture and the work that's happening within Teagasc and what's planned for what's coming down the tracks as well. So until next week, have a lovely weekend and take care of yourselves. Thank you. You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.